Hey everyone, and welcome back to Don't Open That Door. We're here again with another director interview, and this time we're back with Miles Doleac. You might remember him as acting and directing in The Dinner Party, but we're here today to discuss his new film, Demigod. So first off, let me ask, Miles, how are you?
I'm doing very well, sir. How you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Great. It's good to see you again, man.
Good to see you guys. I listened to your review, by the way. I'm gratified that I finally won over Dan.
Yeah.
You know, he's such a Scrooge.
Yeah.
So I guess right off the bat, I just have to ask, there's a really heavy German presence, influence, language in this movie. What inspired you? What made you take that direction specifically to go for Germany?
Well, first and foremost, authenticity. I didn't want to make a film set in the Black Forest and have everybody speaking English, including the native Germans. To me, I see that kind of thing in movies, and it just kind of takes you out of the movie. So the other thing was I really wanted to create this kind of alien other world that made our hero couple, Robin and Leo, feel as isolated as possible, you know, strangers in a strange land. And in the German language, the literal inability to communicate with the locals, I thought really, really heightened that element of the film.
For sure. I definitely agree. I mentioned it, in the review, but I thought that it was a surprisingly authentic scene where, we have just the lack of communication where sometimes, Robin's trying to get a point across and simply can't because you have this straight up lack of communication there. So I like that quite a bit. When you were coming up with the concept of this movie, though, was it always going to be, I want to do something in Germany, I want to do mythology associated with that area, or were there any other areas where you may have or were thinking about?
It was always Germany. The kernel, the embryo of the story was based on German wild hunt mythology. And I had a bit of German. I spent a summer in Munich at the Goethe Institute during my time. Yeah, during my time in graduate school, enjoying the most delicious beer on the planet.
Color me jealous.
And learning the language. So it's a language that I had at least a tiny bit of facility with, because between then and now I've lost a lot of that. So I knew that was going to be important. Now I still didn't have enough facility to, mediate an entire film that's 35% German dialogue. So we had a German dialect coach, Oliver Hoffer, out of New York City.
Nice.
And one of our principal actors, Elena Sanchez, who plays Latara, is also a native German speaker, fluent in the language.
Thought so.
Yeah, she has a German parent. So she was actually originally going to play a smaller role in the film. And due to a harrowing COVID episode, we had to shake up the cast mid-shoot. We elevated Elena into the role of Latara. And since we were all sequestered on this site, Little Black Creek Campground and Park in Lumberton, Miss, she was like, hey, if I'm not shooting, I'll just come to set and help you guys with the German and the dialect. And so she was an absolute MVP of this. Of course, talented stunt woman as well. The big stunt at the end, which I won't reveal in the spoiler-free section, that was her. That was the actor.
Wow.
So we got really lucky to have two native German speakers at our disposal to make sure the German portions of the film worked.
All right.
That's honestly super impressive. And continuing the sort of line of establishing the world building and stuff, you have worked along this lines of using mythology in The Dinner Party and then again in here. So I just want to ask, in general, as a filmmaker, what attracts you about using mythology as a set piece in your films?
Well, I'm absolutely fascinated and enamored with ancient history and ancient religion, ritual, cult practice. I spent a lot of time reading and thinking about it during the time I was getting my PhD at Tulane University. I've traveled to some spectacular places from the ancient world, Rome, and throughout much of Italy and Greece and Germany, as I mentioned. And this sort of mythos of the ancients just permeates those places. And I love to explore this time before our modern notions of religion, a time where animism, the gods were very real and very present in the lightning, in the fire that cooked your food, in the storm, in the volcano, in the earthquake. You needed them to watch over you if you made a sea voyage. And vegetation deities in particular fascinate me. And Cernunnos is one of them. They're badasses because, of course, they govern the very land and the beasts of the field that human beings must harness to stay alive. But don't cross them because they'll rip your world apart.
Also you, sometimes.
So it was wonderful to get to play with the mythology of vegetation deity and nature deity. Although we pushed Cernunnos. Cernunnos is maybe on the more benevolent side of the spectrum with regard to vegetation deities. We pushed him in a slightly more sinister direction. But, I just think a lot of folks don't realize that maybe, unless they're students of history and religion and mythology, that there was a time when, for the most part, at least, perhaps, Judaism, Zoroastrianism accepted, that gods weren't good or evil. Gods did what they had to do. They were opportunistic, and they were flawed, just like the human beings who depended on them and propitiated them and told their stories. And I think Cernunnos and most vegetation deities are shining examples of that.
There definitely was a time when all that stuff was very, very real.
Yeah.
And I want to take things back one step. You made a comment earlier, but we caught the joke in the movie about, you gave a little COVID elbow bump when you first encountered Leo. And yeah. I'm curious to know, just comparing, back when we spoke about the dinner party, I think that had largely been kind of done before the big outbreak of COVID. Right. I mean, this one is like dead center, you're working through the weeds here. So what was the production like on this one, just generally speaking?
Terrifying.
I believe it.
I mean, the COVID protocols, the possibility of COVID shutting down your show is real enough and hard enough and difficult enough for a big budget show, much less an indie film like ours.
Right.
So we were SAG, we were DGA, we were abiding by the return to work protocols. We were testing 3 or 4 times a week and sanitizing, and we had HEPA filters inside in our interior locations. And as I mentioned, we had a real scare. We had an actor fly in from LA, hit the ground, meet our nurse practitioner. Actor had not come to set. Nurse practitioner tested the actor, tested positive, forced us to shake up our whole cast because, one domino falls, there were 2 or 3 other pieces that we had to sort of rearrange. At the end of the day, I think it worked out in the best interest of the film. In particular, the Elena and Sarah Fisher, who plays Fell, they had started in other roles and moved into those roles. And I think they're both brilliant in the film. But man, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And, I don't know if like current Miles were to go back to Miles before he shot this movie and give him a piece of advice, I wonder if he might say, man, maybe I ought to wait until we're a little further along in this. Because it's crazy. Literally like every day, when you're testing, because we're testing on set, even though we're sequestered and they're only like a very small group of people who ever leave the base camp, if you will, where we're all staying in these cabins. Every time people get swabbed, you're just sitting there going, oh my God, what happens? What happens if somebody's positive? What happens? It's harrowing. And it gets a little easier, I guess. It got a little easier as the production went along because after a while, you kind of know, well, we've all been here. We've only been around each other. We continue to test negative.
Right.
And I started to kind of think, well, maybe we're actually safer here, than being out in the outside world.
Probably.
Because we were in the middle, literally, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But it was very, very hard. And in addition to COVID, we were shooting a film that was largely exterior in the dead of winter. We had a minor in the cast, and there were some very real obstacles. And thankfully, we had a team that was committed to delivering this vision. and pulled together and brought her home, because it was it was rough, man. It was rough.
No, I definitely believe that.
Yeah, and I think, with the cast swap, I mean, I thought, like you mentioned, they did a really, really good job, and you couldn't tell that they may have not been the original cast for that, actor, that role, I should say. They did great.
Yeah, I mean, it's trite to say a blessing in disguise, right? But it really, I think it ultimately did work out in the film's best interests. I mean, those two actors, Elena and Sarah, so beautifully inhabited those roles. It's hard for me to imagine anybody else doing it. I mean, the cast we had prior to production was very talented as well, no question about it. But I think it came down the way it was supposed to.
Yeah. Now, in our review, you probably heard us say that I think our favorite part of the film was the soundtrack.
Yes.
And I know that sometimes you work in the sound and music as well. And I think I had seen that you did the ending credit music as
Yes.
well. Are you
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes,
How did that all come together, and just the music in general for the film?
So working with my longtime friend and composer, Clifton Hyde, again on this one, who, believe me, will love to hear that you felt it was a combination of Angelo Badalamenti and Trent Reznor.
It was, man. I'm telling you.
Maybe with a little Jerry Goldsmith peppered in.
Yeah.
Omen, choirs and stuff. I mean, Clifton and I always start talking about the score at the script phase. And although firm decisions are never made until picture lock, we had a pretty good idea of what we wanted, at least initially. You guys are talking about the synths, and that was very intentional. We talked a lot about Tangerine Dream and Vangelis and their use of synth, and we wanted to incorporate that sound into the score, but we wanted to add this sort of haunting, creepy, more gothic kind of element, churchly ritual element, which was brought along by I think the viola da gamba and the choir. One of my favorite scores of all time is The Omen, and I mean the use of voices in it is just so chilling, and so I wanted some of that as well. In some ways, we were trying to combine these two sound worlds, right? Where one, this almost operatic with the voices, but then we wanted to make the voices more primal and chanty. And then on the other hand, this very synthesized electronic kind of vintage sound from the 80s. You might have heard some sort of Brian May style Flash Gordon guitar in there.
Hell yeah, we did.
So that was very intentional. And at first it felt a little bonkers, but then as it began to come together, it just all made sense. And it probably is my favorite score that we've done for a film. So I'm really, really glad that you noticed that. The end credit song, which I co-wrote with a talented young man named Armand Bavigi, was meant to be sort of in the spirit of Bauhaus or something like that, like 80s goth punk. And I mean, the great thing about working with these guys is when you have a talented composer, you just say, I want it to sound like this. I want it to sound like Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails, or Bauhaus, or whatever. And they know those sounds. They know how they were created, and they give you something that's just blows you away. And so, yeah, really, really pleased with how the score and the music turned out for this one.
Yeah, I like how the score had character to it too, and in some movies, not this is a bad thing, but sometimes the music is almost, it's just there to help accentuate the film, which is good, but you don't really notice it. And then other times it's sort of the opposite, where it's like, wow, the music was really cool, but kind of at the detriment of the film. It takes you out of it because you're so focused on the music. But I thought this really perfectly blended that of, it has character, but it accentuates the film still and doesn't override what you're watching.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, that was the idea. I mean, I think music is so important. I want my audiences to feel the music. I don't want it to just be a punctuation mark. I want it to be fully integrated into the characters and their journey. And I feel like we achieved that.
Definitely.
Yeah, you guys definitely made me go put on my good headphones for this one. So real quick to our audience, we're about to enter our spoiler section where we dig a little bit deeper into the film. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, go ahead, go watch it, and definitely come back to check out, the spoiler section. But Miles, real quickly, where are some places that people can see this movie? Because it has a physical release as well, right?
Yeah, so there's a limited theatrical release in 10 or so cities, including Los Angeles, Dallas, Seattle, Boston, Cleveland, Detroit, New Orleans, a couple of towns in Mississippi near where we shot the film, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, DeIberville, Mississippi. But if you are not in one of those cities, or you don't feel safe just yet going to see a film at the movie theater, you will be able to catch it throughout North America on iTunes and Amazon and Google Play and Fandango now, all the so-called per-click sites. And if you do that, thank you for watching, but I certainly do encourage you to watch it on the biggest screen possible with the best sound possible, or with some fancy headphones like you got there, sir.
Thank you so much. And with, no further ado, let's dive into the spoilery section. So to lead off with, Nico, I think you got some questions about the titular character himself, don't you?
Absolutely. And before our cut to the spoiler section, we were talking about how there is such a big part that music plays with vibes and just the feel of the film. I want to sort of delve deeper into that, specifically with Cernunnos and Chima Chekwa. Cernunnos has such an incredibly awe-inspiring presence on screen, so I definitely want to go see that in as big of a screen as possible once I can. But what was it like working with Chima on just establishing the titular Demigod's vibe?
Well, we knew physicality was going to be important. Chima is a stunt actor. He by trade, he has incredibly imposing physicality just walking in a room.
Yeah, how tall is he? Do you remember?
I think Chima's probably 6'3" or 6'4". Don't quote me on that, but he just feels like a very big presence, looming presence. And in addition to that, we did diverge a little bit from the typical design of Cernunnos, who's typically depicted as an older man with a long beard and the horns of a stag and robes. And we wanted something a little more primal, more animal, to represent the fact that Cernunnos really was half nature, and nature is terrifying and awe-inspiring and bestial at times, right? So we had a lot of fun working on that physicality. And of course, Chima is wearing a prosthetic mask, which he had not done before, and I think was very tough on him at times. In some ways, it made it harder to see, and I think any actor who's ever had to wear a mask or a prosthetic understands the limitations that those things put on you. And despite that, we're asking him to do these difficult physical things, which he did beautifully. And then, of course, finding Cernunnos' voice, we knew that we would not be able to use a lot of production sound for Cernunnos because of the mask.
Yeah.
So almost every line you hear, well, I would say every line you hear is either ADR. Every Cernunnos line is either ADR or recorded wild. If we wanted to make sure we were getting the ambient of the space, for some particular reason, we would have him take the mask off and record the lines on the day, which was actually turned out to be a great thing, because we really got to work on his cadence. We really got to work on his vocal quality and his delivery, especially when we got in the studio after the film. We were no longer under the time constraints of we got to get this, hurry up. We could really take our time with him in the booth and working on how we wanted these lines delivered, while having the video, having the cut there in front of us. So he was game. He was really game, and we knew that was going to be a tough role to cast. We knew we were going to ask a lot of that actor, and we knew we needed somebody who was going to dive in and unafraid, and Chima certainly did that.
It paid off in spades, let me tell you. Yeah. And on the note of being sort of this oppressive force almost, what was it like being on that end of the spectrum yourself, being a more of a villainous character in this one?
Well, I mean,
or villainesque, I guess I could say.
Yeah, it's an old song. It's true. The villains are often more fun to play. They often get to do more. And I wouldn't call Arthur a villain. I think he's somebody he cares very deeply about his daughter, who he truly does believe is everything in his world.
Absolutely.
And he's willing to do whatever it takes to protect her. I think you guys said in your review, maybe if he took some time to really suss out the situation, he would have made a different or better choice than, using Leo as bait. But, these people are under extreme stress and they're, it's life or death. They're trying to make these decisions on the fly, and it's kill or be killed kind of, survival of the fittest. But this was a really fun role. I as we began developing the script from a very early stage, this is the character that I knew I wanted to play. He reminded me a little bit of something from a Sergio Leone film, kind of like Jason Robards in Once Upon a Time in the West. At times, maybe a little Lee Van Cleef in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Not that evil. Angel Eyes is pretty damn evil. But we even did a little during the show. We did a little Leone homage in the standoff between Arthur and Robin, when Robin figures out what has happened, what Arthur has done to Leo, complete with a little jingle jangle Ennio Morricone guitar. So this was great. It was great fun playing this role and getting to work with Rachel Nichols, who's somebody that I've admired for a long time, been a fan of for a long time, and the wonderful Rachel Riles, who played my daughter Amalia. You talk about game for anything. She was just terrific. In early drafts of the script, that character was male and older, and when we were talking it over, Mike Horn and I, and Lindsay, my partner in life and art and fellow producer, it didn't feel right. We wanted the character to be younger, and ultimately we decided to go with a girl because we wanted to be able to explore to some degree the relationships of daughters to overbearing, oppressive, controlling fathers, grandfathers. Robin's character has one in Carl, and Amalia has one in Arthur, and how do you deal with those expectations and generational trauma and all these types of things. But yeah, it was great fun to play that role, and certainly to play it off of these amazing actors.
So we saw in your previous movie, The Dinner Party, the gore in that one was much more, I guess I would say maybe a set piece. We don't see a ton of it happen on screen, but we see a lot of the aftermath for sure.
Right.
Now, in this movie, in Demigod, we see a lot of it happen. We see you get stabbed. I think you even get your hand chopped off. So what's kind of the approach to violence and gore in this one? How did that, on a production level, how is that different from this movie versus The Dinner Party or other films?
Well, we knew in this movie we wanted some real gore money shots, if you will. We wanted some set piece gore moments. We didn't want to go so far as to turn people off who are not into gore, but when we committed to the gore, we wanted it to be something special. We wanted it to be all in. So we chose some moments. The Arthur death, of course, as you correctly point out, Dan, hand chopped off, the sword through the sternum. The Grimmer death, where he gets his throat ripped out by Karanunos. The Leo death, which is not as viscerally gory.
Beautiful scene, though.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of my favorite shots in the movie. Maybe my favorite shot is Karanunos coming over the ridge at sunset, the anamorphic flare stretching the entire length of the screen. And then, of course, the Robin throat slit at the end. So we knew if we could sell those 4 moments that we'd be achieving our purpose, and every single one of them is done practically, which I'm really proud of.
You should. They looked insane.
I was really insistent upon, and that's the good work of our production designer Julie Tosh and our makeup department head Ashley Treadaway, who really delivered. Yeah, I just think that CG blood, most of the time just doesn't sell. I mean, I see even on big shows where there's CG blood, and it's just like, well, that's computer generated, you know. And we committed to it in Dinner Party too. And, you know, we generally wind up on occasion doing a little sweetener after the fact digitally. But I mean, the vast majority of the blood you see in this movie is practical. So I'm glad it sold.
Yeah, and that's something that we talk about occasionally on our podcast too, is practical effects versus CG, because I think all of us, especially Justin, we're all fans of practical versus CG, like every time you can tell, and it definitely works better. Now, with a lot of horror movies, they tend to hide their villains, and you know, like you think like Alien or Jaws or things like that. You kind of went the opposite route. You know, right away from the very opening scene, you see the priestesses, and then maybe halfway through the film or so, Cernunnos comes in and
with the bull rush.
Yeah, and you don't really hide them very much. Was that a conscious decision, or what was the thought process behind that?
Certainly, with regard to the priestesses, we wanted them to be front and center and an active visual presence in the film. We wanted the audience to feel like they're sort of lurking about around every corner all of the time and could, you know, jump out at any moment and grab somebody. So very much wanted them to be present and to be this sort of specter imbuing the proceeding. With Cernunnos, we, as you say, we saved him till about halfway through the movie, getting a good look at him, and we tried, at least up until the Leo death, to sort of keep him sort of hiding behind trees or getting very quick glimpses, you know, of him here and there, but not really getting a good look at him. We wanted the audience's first full-on look at him to be Leo's death. And I just thought it was so important to see him stabbing that sword into Leo. And then once you see that, you know, there's no real reason to hide him anymore. It's kind of like, after Quint's death in Jaws, what are we hiding?
Exactly.
You know, we wanted to keep him sort of menacing, lurking up until that bit with Leo, and then let Cernunnos' vegetation god flag fly.
And, you know, I'm glad you mentioned him as a god, because I did want to talk really briefly about, I guess, a couple of the themes in this movie and some things that happen. So first off, you've got the very, very, very strong message of nature, man's role in nature, and just kind of the cyclical, I guess, element to nature. You know, they talk about the rebirth of you know, Cernunnos time and time again. They go through all that. What made you want to really go with that theme being kind of underlying in this movie, where it's like, it's not just about horror. It's not just a monster or, you know, god, demigod that's out for you. There's a little bit here about nature and man's role in it. What inspired you? What made you do that?
Well, I think the natural world and the human experience in it is about birth, life, death, rebirth. I mean, right. that's the cycle of the crops and of the land, and, you know, the changing of the seasons. And I think that I wanted to say something. I loved what you guys said in your review about the line, Cernunnos line, "Many have worshipped me knowingly or unknowingly."
Yeah, I love that line.
And that someone is in nature having some sort of experience, positive or negative, right? Whether it's some ecstatic moment of nature mysticism, or being trapped in a terrible storm or something, or looking out on the Grand Canyon and being in awe of the natural world. Cernunnos is there, right? Whether that's what we're saying in the movie, at least. And then, of course, obviously, with climate change and men mistreating the world, nature is suffering, and in our narrative, it fights back. So there is that. I just think that's a fascinating push and pull between, and it, I mean, it literally happens, right? I mean, scientists say that, you know, that the extreme temperatures are the result of man's impact on the environment and all that stuff. And, you know, it I want to get political, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't treat the natural world well, there will be dramatic repercussions, whether on a micro or a macro level. And I just love the idea that there is this God, half God, whose job it is to guard and protect the natural world at any cost. And that involves sacrifice, blood sacrifice, which of course is a throwback to the ancient world and blood sacrifice, not human sacrifice, all that terribly often, although it did exist, is an integral part of nearly every ancient religious tradition, including Judaism. And because it's so chthonic, I mean, the gods demand, I mean, to life requires death, and it's this dramatic, in your face, visceral reality that we don't quite think enough about nowadays, but that the ancients were always thinking about.
No, that is completely fair. And I personally, I vibe with that message a lot. In fact, there was one scene, I mentioned it in the review, but I, definitely wanted to ask you about it. So there's a scene where Robin's grandfather, they shoot, I believe it's a deer or something like that in the woods. And, there's the whole scene where she doesn't want to shoot the deer. And then she also doesn't want to eat the eyeball that her grandfather offers her. Yeah. And while, I never personally had to eat any eyeballs of any animals, I had to dig out quite a few fish eyes, but I never had to, eat any animal eyeballs. One thing that certainly, I guess, almost appealed to me was having experienced part of my childhood in, Trinidad, small island, definitely a lot of ties and roots to nature there. I experienced similar things with, like killing animals or being around that kind of stuff, just kind of the more brutal or even cruel side of nature. Now, that particular scene, what was the inspiration behind it? Because I found it to be very, almost scarily accurate to what happened to, a lot of kids around my age that I saw, where they wanted nothing to do with it. Like my sister, for example, was pretty much like Robin when she was small. She never wanted anything to do with it. They'd always, like make me do it. Oh, like even when it's like crabs, like, hey, Justin, from like a small child, this is how you kill a crab, like ripping off its back. And that sounds brutal, but that's how you do things culturally. That's how we learn to do it. So what inspired that?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a fairly rural area of the country in South Mississippi. And I think in the less industrialized parts of the world, more agrarian, agriculture-based regions, whether that's Trinidad or South Mississippi, that stuff happened.
Yeah.
I didn't ever do it because I just couldn't bear it. But, I had friends that would go deer hunting, and when they kill their first deer, they have to like eat a piece of the entrails or smear the blood on their face and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's that those rituals are longstanding, very real things that happen to sort of, initiate kids into the circle of the hunt. Sometimes it's a matter of celebrating the animal, right? In a way. I literally knew people that were like eating deer parts after killing a deer, and it just absolutely terrified me. So I thought that's got to be in the movie. It's because, you can imagine, especially like a young girl in that environment, and the granddad is, shoving a deer eyeball in her mouth. I mean, what must that experience have been like? I mean, you'd never forget it,
How was Rachel doing that shot?
It's a quail leg with food coloring on it, I believe. Or some kind of, maybe it was the edible blood. We put some edible blood on it. We had like the hero eyeball, which was not edible and looked really disgusting, with, nerve fibers hanging off, and it's black. But then for the actual moment where it goes in her mouth, it's a quail leg, which she found equally revolting, I think. The gagging was very real. And she'd never eat another quail egg unless we maybe needed one more take. That would be the last one. She was really game like that. We were shoving weird stuff in her mouth, the goo that she has to drink.
Oh yeah.
She was a real trooper. But no, I think gag you see on the movie is a real gag.
I guess kind of the last major question from my end here is, so we talked a little bit about kind of Arthur, his motivations. Is he not a villain? I think it's only fair that the same kind of question is asked about Cernunnos. I think so. I got really into, like kind of when I learned a little bit about the lore and when I was seeing some of the things that were talked about, I really, really dug, some of the other things they talked about Cernunnos, not just the hunt, but also, talking about, how showed man how to become stronger through the slaughter and consumption, of meat, that kind of thing. And there's a whole different side to Cernunnos, even this one in this movie, where, you say maybe a little more sinister. I struggle with categorizing Cernunnos as a villain, particularly with the way the movie ends. I don't know if I can do that. Do you consider Cernunnos in this movie to be a villain?
I think he and his cult are antagonists to our hero couple, right? And to our protagonist.
Certainly.
Cernunnos and his cult are certainly creating obstacles that they have to overcome on this quest. But I don't think that this Cernunnos is entirely evil, if that's what you mean by villain.
Right.
I do think there's a humanity, there's a mission, there's a charge to keep that this figure sees himself as upholding. I think you guys also mentioned in the review the moment where he weeps at Robin's death,
right?
Which you guys totally nailed. I think this Robin's family has been serving Cernunnos for generations, and so breaking that chain is painful to him. It's not just about Robin; it's about this family of servants that have been in his retinue for all these years, and now that's gone. Doesn't mean he's not going to find other servants, but it it's a bit of a gut punch for him.
Definitely. Well, that's all I had. Nico and Dan, any questions that you guys might have for Miles?
Can we get any kind of peeks as to what's behind the screen for any of your next projects, if you're willing to divulge?
Sure. Lindsay and I just completed a script, which is kind of bonkers. I've been wanting to get back to my roots in character drama for a while now, and we had the germ of an idea for a script. We've sort of been batting around, and we'd outline it, or we'd do a little writing on it. We never quite found the right hook or the time. But during our sojourn in Mississippi from Hurricane Ida, we had a lot of time on our hands where we had no significant responsibility. So we sat down for those 2 weeks, and we wrote every day and pounded out the script, which is kind of if you were to put Noah Baumbach's Marriage Story and a Wong Kar-wai film like 2046, In the Mood for Love, Chungking Express, with a Wes Anderson film, and then think of like an 80s best cheesiest 80s music video.
I'm here for this. I'm so here for this.
It's sort of a quasi musical. It's sort of a
absolutely.
It's sort of a dark character drama, quasi musical, thriller, relationship drama thing. The other thing is that Jeremy London, who's been in our last two films, been like, man, I love working with you guys, but you got to write me a lead. You got to write me a leading role. I want to really delve into something with you guys. So we wrote a lead for Jeremy in this new one, and we sent it to him, and he was like, holy shit, I love this.
I'm so stoked.
He gets to sing. Jeremy plays guitar, and it's, I don't know, it's bonkers. I love it. I really do love it, and hopefully we'll be shooting that next year. I won't tell you the title because it probably will change 3 or 4 times, but we're pretty excited about it.
Fair enough. That sounds awesome. And any last words for us about Demigod, or anything that you want, people to think about when they've seen this movie?
Well, I thank you guys again for always covering our films and for the really intelligent, probing perspectives that you bring.
Thank you. To
your reviews. I mean, you guys really watch closely, and I don't find that enough film critics do that. There's wonderful critics out there like you guys, but some of them I feel they just kind of half-ass watch the movie. That's not true, you guys. I mean, you
Demigod was a movie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're digging down in there and getting to the stuff beneath the stuff, and It's wonderful. So I want to thank you guys for that first and foremost. And then just to tell folks to please check out our film as close to October 15th as possible. It's better for us if you're watching it that first week, whether that be in the theater, if you feel safe doing so, or whether that's on one of these streaming platforms. And if you love the movie, or if you like the movie, or if there's just one nice thing that you can say about the movie, it up as a review somewhere on IMDb or Amazon or iTunes. Really helps the visibility of our film. Other consumers do read those reviews. So we would really, really, really appreciate you just taking it. Doesn't have to be long. Just take a couple seconds, write a sentence or two. I love the cinematography, love the score, love the design of Carnunos, whatever it might be. So that's a big help. As indie filmmakers, we face a number of hurdles to get our films seen because we can't buy the visibility that a major studio film can. So we need word of mouth. We need sort of grassroots participation. And so watch our film on the biggest screen you can with the best sound you can and say something nice about it somewhere. And follow me on Instagram. I'll be saying a lot about the film and posting out a lot over the course of the next couple of weeks. I'm at Miles_Doleac. Also, before I go, my wife will kill me if I didn't tell you and all of your listeners that Amalia, the name that you thought was so badass, that was her idea.
Oh, well, that was a very
Hell
good
yeah.
idea. That was a very, very, very good idea.
So Lindsay came up with Amalia. It is great.
It is.
Shout
And
out
when-
to you, Lindsay.
And once again, for our listeners, those theaters, those cities where you can see this, once again, that's Los Angeles, Boston, Seattle, Cleveland, Dallas, Detroit, New Orleans, Hattiesburg, and D'Iberville? Man, I'm hoping
The
I'm saying that
Iberville,
right.
yes, that's right.
All right. So yes, those are where you can go see it. Definitely, DOtD co-signs that. So if you can, please, if you're okay with it, go check it out in the theater. But support this movie any way you can. Drop a kind word about it. You can always reach out to us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at DOtD Horror. We're on Facebook. Don't open that door. As always, you can check out this and anything else we've done, including our previous interview with Miles, on our website. That's DOtDhorror.com. But till next time, take care of one another. Maybe don't piss off nature. And as always, dear listener, don't open that door. Bye.